Welcome to Full Disclosure with me, Ian Stewart, in for Roben Farzad. I have a very special guest today. It's Mike Henry. You may know him as the original voice of Cleveland, voices on American Dad, other voices on Family Guy, Kicked in the Nuts, stand-up comedian, all-around guy. Mike, welcome to Full Disclosure.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ian. Good. Glad you reached out.
Yeah, me too. Full disclosure, I will say that you and I sort of know each other because I used to work with your wife when you guys were based here in Richmond.
Yep.
And I would see you come in to Saks Fifth Avenue or Nordstrom. I forget which one I worked at. It doesn't matter, but I'd see you come in and we chit chat a little bit. So we have a little history.
Yes, absolutely. We're both bald white men,
Yeah.
and
Who pref-
yeah. So we're good, man. I'm down with you.
we prefer baseball caps. And I think we're about the same age. You're having a birthday coming up in November, according to your Wikipedia page. I just turned 60. So an early happy birthday to you.
Hey, thanks, old man. Appreciate it.
We're looking really good.
I think so.
I'm going to start off with, I'm going to steal something from Brett Goldstein's podcast, Films to be Buried With, in a way, which is a great podcast. But what film or TV show made you laugh when you were younger? Like, do you remember a TV show?
Yeah, of course. I used to watch Happy Days to age us. I loved Happy Days, and I laughed some, but I really just love the characters, and I think that sort of inspires me. Is just let's show real life and let things play out as they do, as opposed to trying to make people laugh. Which I'm not sure Happy Days was always leading with truth, as opposed to trying to make jokes. But I liked Happy Days. I like Gilligan's Island. And then movies, the things that I remember laughing at first were the movies, like The Jerk,
Mm-hmm.
Fletch with Chevy Chase, Airplane, Naked Gun, those types of things. And then Fast Times is the best of all, the greatest film ever made. Not
Yeah.
really, but it's in my top five for sure.
No, it's in my top five. The Jerk as well. I mean, I still quote The Jerk when I can. Those aren't cans.
He hates these cans.
He hates
Yeah,
these cans. The great Emmett, was that Emmett Walsh? That played
Emmett
him?
Walsh. Absolutely.
Emmett Walsh. Yeah, The Jerk was just a fantastic movie. I showed my kids that. I showed my kids who are older now as well, like as yours, 15 and 19. I showed them Airplane. My son
Mhm.
absolutely loved it. And I kept telling him to be quiet because you're going to miss some of the jokes.
That's a good thing. Yeah. That's a good problem to have. I remember in the early days of Family Guy, they used to talk about, I don't think we ever did this, holding for a laugh, which I think a lot of sitcoms do or did, because they had the studio audience there. And anyway, just
Yeah.
keep going. I say just keep going. Let them watch it again if they want to catch all the jokes.
So with that though, enjoying these comedy films and TV shows, were you one of the class clowns? I'm sure you get that question a lot. Were you the kid in the back making jokes or a pretty serious student?
That's like asking if Tom Brady was a quarterback. I was the GOAT, or the WOAT, the worst of all time. I was
Yeah.
definitely a class clown, imitating teachers and fellow classmates, and quoting The Jerk and other movies. I was kind of desperate for attention, and so yes. And then I realized I was actually pretty good at it, and that sort of inspired me later in life to just go try to be funny for a living.
Yeah. And you grew up in Michigan. Was that a funny place?
Well, it was only funny until I was two, because I lived there till I was two. And then we moved to Richmond when my dad taught sculpture, got a job teaching sculpture at VCU. And so I actually grew up in Richmond near Thomas Jefferson High School. I would go with other kids in the summertime and play baseball on their field, and walk to 7-Eleven and U Totem to get Slurpees and slushies and all that kind of stuff. And then moved out to the West End. I went to Montessori school, and it was originally in the Fan, and then it moved out to Parham Road. So we moved out to Parham Road, and I went there, and then I went to Mayberry Elementary for 2 years, and then I got a financial aid scholarship to Collegiate for grades 7 through 12. And Collegiate is a very good West End prep school, and so that was my schooling.
Yeah. And apparently you were going to be more of an advertising person or a business person.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. So I always wanted to be kind of normal, because my parents were artists, and my mother painted portraits of all of the wealthy people in Richmond. and my father was a sculptor, and they were divorced, and everything seemed dysfunctional. And I wanted to take refuge in the normalcy of the dads I saw driving up in their BMWs with their suits to drop the kids off at school. I wanted to be one of those guys. I just wanted to be normal. And so I went to Washington and Lee University, and I really thrived there. I loved it. I majored in history, which is of little use in the professional world, or my professional world, and had a great time. I was an SAE. I was the rush chairman. I was class president of the last all-male class
Wow.
at Washington and Lee. So those were my distinctions. And then I went to work at the Martin Agency, a big
Oh, wow.
advertising agency there in Richmond. And I quickly discovered that I didn't care about it at all.
Hmm.
And I could tell a little story, which I will tell.
Yeah.
Uh,
Go
I
go right
was
ahead.
yeah, I thought at the time, I know you guys have the business angle on this podcast. I was young and I was creative, and I wanted to find a safe way to apply my creativity to the business world and build a career and some security. And so I chose advertising, but it very quickly became, just very clear to me that it's not something I wanted to do. I didn't, everything is, of course, trying to sell a product or persuade the general public, to view a product a certain way, and then, of course, buy it and or subscribe or whatever. And so my comedy started really, my class clownship, this was my master's, my doctorate in class clowning. I would prank call my boss as the client. I would, we would play company softball on Tuesday or Wednesday nights, and everybody would go out and just get very drunk afterwards. And it was, it was all I could do to try to find some joy in where I was. And so then I saw David Lynch's Wild at Heart at the West Hampton Theater in Richmond. And I realized if someone can be that individual and that expressive with their utter weirdness, so could I. And I could go and do my thing. And so I just packed up my Jetta, gave notice, and moved on out to California.
Yeah. And out there too, you were able to get into some amazing programs, the Groundlings, being one of them, one of the premier improv troops and systems in the country, along with later on Upright Citizens Brigade on the East Coast. How did
Yeah.
you decide to go to that? Because you had this background at collegiate, which is going a little too far back, because you had the background at school and advertising and wanted to
Yeah.
do business, did you just kind of say, oh, I need to figure out how to do this? Or did someone
Well,
say, hey, you should go to this school?
I always knew, from a young age that I could make people laugh. And so I didn't know what to do with that. And you know what? Actually, I have my very first business card, which I'm going to show you in a second. I moved to LA, and the first thing that I did, I signed up for a UCLA extension, which is basically night school class in screenwriting. And so I didn't know anything about how to structure a script. I'd never written any long form anything. And so I came out here and I took that class, and I also took an improv class there at UCLA Extension. And basically an improv class, it's, I don't know, I think 7 people or something, and you take turns getting up in pairs, and you literally improvise and you feed off of each other. And so I learned how to do some of that. Then I went to this bookstore in town, which is sort of the industry actors bookstore, called Samuel French. And I would go to that bookstore and I picked up all these books, including How to Do Stand-Up Comedy by this woman, Judy Carter, who held a workshop. And so I signed up for the Judy Carter Comedy Workshop. And I went like every whatever night it was, Tuesday night, and there are like 10 people in the class. Each of them gets up for 5 minutes and tries to make everybody laugh. And so you do that for 5 weeks in a row, and you're honing your material and learning about, setup, punch, and timing and point of view and all of the things you need for stand-up comedy. And then the final class was a showcase at an actual comedy club. And so you invite your friends, and you get up, and then you hit the open mic circuit, which is brutal, which is coffee shops that are very cliquey, and the people running the rooms put their friends up, and you're basically there waiting 4 hours to get up and do your 10 minutes. And it was a grind, a coffee grind. Get it?
Yeah.
So So I did that. And then I also signed up for classes at the Groundlings Theater, which is, of course, breeding ground for Saturday Night Live. So many, half of SNL's cast has gone through
Right.
the Groundlings, learning sketch comedy and improv. And but back to when I first hit town, I knew I was funny. I had no credentials, and so here was my business card, which literally just says Mike Henry, a funny guy, and my phone number. Which, hey, you could try
Yeah.
calling the number. I don't know if it works anymore.
You know what's funny though is in middle school and junior, we call it junior high, but in junior high, when I grew up in the valley, in San Fernando Valley in LA, we had a print
Junior, get
class.
high.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
We
kidding.
had a
In the
we had a print
valley.
class, and I put on mine Ian Stewart, actor,
There you
my
go.
phone number.
You know what? Don't mince words.
Yeah,
Just go right at it.
it landed me nothing.
Well,
No,
yeah. I don't know if the business card got me anything, but I still have it, which is great. But yeah,
yeah,
so I didn't, I performed some, with Groundlings groups and some with, as you mentioned, Upright Citizens Brigade. I did a play with them and took a bunch of classes. Back then, that was the late 90s with Amy Poehler and Ian Roberts and Matt Besser and Matt Walsh were the four
mm,
Upright Citizens Brigade folks, and just learned a ton about comedy. And my roommate at the time was a guy named Rob Hubel, who is a comedy actor now, and you see Rob in a million things. And I just didn't have a backup plan. I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I just wanted to go
mm,
be funny for a living. I was inspired by Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, like I said, and I just wanted to be funny. And so I got every kind of odd job you could get, waiting tables, being a production assistant. For a while, I was back in Richmond. I was doing modeling, and
mm.
not sexy modeling, but modeling for like the Virginia Power Company, where they'd be giving out a brochure about something. And I'm the guy, the employee with the name tag, shaking hands with the happy, uh,
And
appropriately raced couple that was
yeah,
being served by the power company. Just whatever it took to keep my time flexible. Yeah, and then I just started making stuff.
yeah, it's a tough business, I'm sure back then, because you and I are the same age. I was trying to, as mentioned, be an actor because of my business card. I had ties to the entertainment industry, so I know it was tough. There was no internet to post anything like, "Look, I'm funny. I can make this film."
Right.
You had to really kind of work hard and do things. Did you have an agent at the time? How did you get that going?
Um, Philosophical for a second.
Yeah.
I always tell young people just move in the direction that inspires you and figure out logistically, logically, practically how to keep going in that direction. And so I was inspired. I knew that I could come out here, and I had a lot of belief in myself and that I could do it. I had no training. I had no connections. I had literally, I just had to find my way. When I got to California, I stayed on someone's couch who I knew it from working in advertising for 3 nights in Laurel Canyon. I went to the UCLA bulletin board and looked for roommate wanted, room for rent, whatever. I rented a room from a nice young professional couple in Brentwood,
Hmm.
and I got a job waiting tables. I worked at the Gap. There used to be a retail store called the Nature Company.
Yeah.
I worked at the Gap and the Nature Company for between Thanksgiving and Christmas to make as much money as I could before I went back to Richmond for the holidays for Christmas. And then I got back out in January of 1991, and I got a job at a restaurant and started working as a production assistant here and there. And literally, I would do my open mics, and I would just do what I could every day to keep moving forward. And I remember, and I would have some great sets. Sometimes I would make a lot of people laugh, and it felt good. And then, you're back to your waiting tables job, and hoping people order alcohol, so they'll tip a little bit more, so you can make a little bit more. And I waited tables. I waited on O.J. Simpson and Nicole
Hmm.
Brown. I
Wow.
waited on Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver. I waited on Jerry Seinfeld, Robin Williams,
Were, were you at
all
the
of these people.
were you at the Hamburger Hamlet in Brentwood?
No, I was caddy corner at the Daily Grill. And, So I was around all these, people who were doing what I really wanted to do and had hit the big time. And I myself was just grinding it out. And I would get up in the morning and I would, whatever, exercise, and I would just try to write jokes or write a sketch, something to further my comedy, which I worked very, very hard at. And I remember one time, waiting tables, I went outside and just took a breath, when things slowed down one night, and I was looking out at the sky, at the moon or whatever. And if you can visualize, I knew that I was doing everything I could. So if you can imagine like me working upward in a straight line, and I knew the world rotating around, was all going to line up at some point. And I just had faith that if I just kept doing what I was doing, I had no idea how I was going to get there, that, it would work. And so years later, I'm doing all of that. And I came back to, at one point I got promoted to a better restaurant that the same guy owned. And I realized, man, my waiting tables career is going better than my going further than my comedy career. And so I literally put all of my stuff in storage, and I moved back to Virginia because I knew that I wasn't going to get noticed at an open mic at the Coffee Roasters at 12:50 on a Wednesday night.
Right.
But I wanted to film stuff, and so I went back and I used some of my advertising connections, and I started producing kind of local commercials, car commercials or whatever. And at that time, we didn't have phones and laptops to create video content with. You had to use a Betacam camera, and you had to cut on an Avid. And so I just kind of aligned myself with the people that had that equipment. And so we would keep the equipment an extra day and shoot one of these parodies that I would put myself in, which all this stuff is actually on MikeHenry.com.
Right.
So MikeHenry.com is owned by somebody that runs a printer cartridge distribution, and they refuse to sell me the name. So it's MikeHenry.co. But there's all this early work, all these old parodies that I did, and people really laughed at those things. And so I knew I was building something cool. And my brother Patrick went to RISD, to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I acted in his films. And so I started just getting real experience. And what I did in his films, there was one his junior year where I went up there, took the train up to Providence, and I expected to just kind of get a script from him and we'd go shoot. He picks me up. Then we're in the borrowed car that he had to go pick up all the equipment, and he had to check out the cameras and all this stuff from the student checkout place.
Right.
Then we go back to his place and he starts setting up and blah, blah, blah. We didn't start filming until like 1 a.m. I'd gotten there at like 4 in the afternoon, and he didn't have a script. And so I just had to improvise. So I did all of my stand-up comedy, and a lot of my stand-up comedy was pop culture oriented. It was Magic Johnson and Chewbacca the Wookiee, in a deodorant commercial, or a Lysol deodorant where Chewbacca would be in the bathroom and smell it up so bad that Magic had to spray the spray to clear it up. And so that was the tone of the humor. So as luck would have it, or as fate would have it, Patrick's good friend was Seth MacFarlane, who, went on to create Family Guy, and he really dug what I was doing. And so the pop culture stuff was right in line with his thinking for Family Guy. And so all of that work led directly to Family Guy, which didn't happen until a couple years after that. But, it was the thing where I was just doing what I thought, what made me feel good, and that was making people laugh. And so I always encourage people to have the guts and the faith in themselves to just do what makes them feel good, and make friends and help other people do what they're trying to do. And life, or whatever, is one big organism here, and it's going to shift. If you keep pushing in one direction, it's going to open up for you and it's going to work out. And so it was literally blind faith that got me, to Family Guy, which when I moved to LA from the Martin Agency, it was 1990. When Family Guy started, it was 1998. So there were, that was an 8-year, leap of faith. And also during that time is when I moved to New York, and I did stuff with Upright Citizens. I acted in commercials. I could tell you about many other times where it was just all just faith driven, faith in myself, faith in, God, if you want to call God, whatever your thought of God is. Like I trusted, and I just took that leap.
Yeah. But you kept working too. It wasn't like you were sitting back,
I worked my
thinking,
tail off.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was and I was motivated. I was highly motivated. I did not like the status quo, and it's ironic that I worked in advertising, because advertising is the thing that I still cannot stand. I do
Mm.
not want to hear like that. Is if I'm watching a ball game, it's muted as soon as the ads come on. So I'm sorry to all of your
Yeah.
NPR advertisers.
That's
I'm kidding, but yeah, like I don't like people blindly following, or people being manipulated, or whatever. I think that's what I try to make fun of,
yeah.
and that's what I like to make fun of.
Well, if you're just joining us, my guest is Mike Henry. You know him as the original voice of Cleveland and other voices on Family Guy. He was in the Orville, which you had to figure out who he was as Lieutenant Dan because he had a full costume on. And you know him from kickedinthenuts.com and many other places. I'm Ian Stewart in for Roben Farzad. Stay with us. And now music. I'm just kidding. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, I'm Ian Stewart in for Roben Farzad. On full disclosure, my guest is Mike Henry, voice actor, director, writer, entrepreneur, all-around guy that you should know if you don't. Original voice of Cleveland, as mentioned, but other things that he's been in. He's doing a whole host of things. His own TV show on YouTube, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Family Guy, we were just talking about. So everything aligned, and you kind of got the Family Guy, but that was kind of a bumpy journey. How at that time were you staying motivated? It must have been, I'm finally here, but I know they had a rough start, or they started and then they stopped, and then how was that kind of transition for you, or that period of time?
Yeah, well, everybody's got their own, is on their own trip, and mine was I was actually very close. I was probably about a year away from, being on Saturday Night Live. My brother Patrick and I were living in New York. We were making short films for Lorne Michaels for his college cable network at the time, which was called the Burly Bear Network. Again, you can see all this on my website, mikehenry.co, or there's links to
Yeah.
it. So I wanted to act. I wanted to be on camera and be funny, and I was really working on that through stand up, through improv, through sketch, through shooting things with myself, as the star of them. And when Family Guy happened, I was like, shoot, I don't know if I really want to go out there back out to LA just yet. And then when Seth told me how much it paid, I was like, all right, well, yeah, I'll do that. Because I was in debt, man. I was like 40 grand in debt in
Mm.
1998, just paying rent. I had great credit. I had all these cash advances. I would revolve my credit cards. Like I literally just bet everything on myself, which,
Mm.
I recommend if you truly believe in yourself, which I always have. So, when Seth called and said, and basically I helped Seth write jokes for the pilot pitch that when he was trying to sell the show to Fox, and I would show him the live action shorts that I was doing, and so we were just sort of keeping in touch. And then I was actually kind of surprised when he offered the job, and so I took it and moved to LA, and you know it was really cool. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell, you know that you're whatever he says, you're an expert at something if you've done it for 10,000 hours.
Mm.
And I remember doing that math when I read that book. I literally had put in about 10,000 hours into comedy between writing jokes, performing, networking, editing, auditions, like all of the things. And so when I hit the Family Guy writers room, I was ready. And everyone else in the room were sitcom writers, people that
Mm.
were used to the half hour format. I was kind of this wild card that was brought in, and just truthfully, I just started hitting home runs. Like it was a perfect place for me to be at a perfect time. And so I started pitching all these characters: Cleveland, Herbert, Consuela. Oh no, Bruce.
Right.
The greased up deaf guy, like all of these characters I'd pitched in the writer's room, and, started doing the voices. And, it was wonderful. And I wrote gags all the time. My passion was making fun of TV and, the status quo and whatever people are being fed. And so it was perfect for me. So all of that was right on. And so Family Guy ran for, I guess, 2.5 years before we were canceled. And there was some politics going on at the network. The executives who had brought the show in were no longer there. A lot of stuff
Yeah.
going on, and we got moved around on the time slots and not really promoted. And so we lost ratings, and so we got canceled. And so, it was, I guess, around 2000, 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
The whole time I didn't have all my cards or all my chips on Family Guy. I wanted to continue that live action stuff. My brother Patrick and I actually had a deal to make a movie with Lorne Michaels and MTV Films, a midnight sketch movie.
Hmm.
They were going to do a midnight movie that used to be a popular thing when we were growing up. And we basically just screwed up the script. We had, like, all of our family dysfunction came out in this script, and we just bickered it. Like, it didn't work out. And so that didn't happen, but, nonetheless still had that drive to do live action stuff. And so Family Guy was canceled. I wanted to just do what was funny. And so
Right.
we took a meeting with Punk'd, that prank show
Mm-hmm.
back in the day. And we were talking to some of the producers, and I believe it was Punk'd. It might have been a different show because we met on a few, where they were laughing because they pulled a big prank in a Vegas casino hotel where they staged a murder scene in a room, and the cleaning ladies came in there and freaked out completely, and it caused them great distress. Like, they thought they saw a bloody body, like whatever. And these producers were so clueless. They were just laughing. They were like, yeah, and then now they're suing us, but it's gonna, it's blah blah blah. And
Man.
so we walked out of that meeting and we were like, what dicks?
Yeah.
Hopefully I can say that on here. But
Yeah.
what a-holes, what D asterisk CKS
Yeah.
these guys were. And so we came up with this idea, I guess anything's supposed to be okay as long as you're going to be on TV. And so we did this thing where we bought this orange afro and a green jumpsuit that I would wear, and we staged it where we'd have a friend, we shot it like a hidden video, and we'd have a friend walking down the street, and I'd come running out of nowhere and kick him in the nuts. And, it was very well staged. It looked real, and we had a sound effect. And then you would cut to a crowd laughing, and then back to the person who got kicked being furious and coming at me. And then I'm like, wait. And I point at the camera and I say, you've been kicked in the nuts.
Yeah.
And then they just laugh, and the crowd laughs, and it's just like this fun, hilarious thing, and they're hugging me. And so we turned that into this whole web series, and I think there's like 24 episodes of it on kickedinthenuts.com if anybody wants to check it out. But it's utter farce, utter parody, and it's what I thought was funny. And at the time, other people were going and getting other TV writing jobs and this, that, and the other, and I just didn't want to. I just wanted to keep doing what I thought was funny.
Yeah. Well, like me, you probably grew up watching Candid Camera,
Sure.
which is, tame compared to what was happening at that time with you with Punk'd. And I think there was another one, like a British show that kind of had hidden camera stuff. I can't remember the name of it. The guy was hilarious.
There was
But
one called Just Kidding, I think, out of Canada, which, whatever.
he'd walk around with a huge cell phone in the theater and go, I'm at the cinema. And I don't know.
Oh, right.
Until I remember that.
People
remember
being
that guy.
goofballs.
Yeah. So you're doing that, and you were keeping busy. Then Family Guy got reintroduced, and you've been steadily kind of working on that. And there was a bit where you did the Cleveland show for a while, and
Yep.
so you're keeping busy. But I guess in the background, were you still thinking about your other gigs or wanting to be on camera
yeah.
more?
No, I absolutely am. And, I've got two kids. One is a senior in college. The other is toward the end of high school. And they've really been my focus, honestly, for the last, 20 years or so. They've just come first. My son ended up in Virginia, and so I was back there a lot and met Sarah, my wife, and our daughter grew up largely back there. But now, I've just sort of put my kids first, and Family Guy has been so great because you can record from anywhere, and it's just been wonderful. But I do have those live action aspirations still. I shot a pilot in 2017 in Richmond called Home on the Strange,
Hmm.
that the local crew who I'm friendly with, from shooting shorts back in the day. We brought in some LA actors and myself, and I directed it and I financed it and did everything. I never even told my agent I was doing it until it was done,
Hmm.
and it almost sold, but it didn't. And so that taught me a lot. That was really my film school. And like I said, we've moved to LA since then. Like I said, it's family's been first, but I'm at a juncture now where Family Guy is great, and I do the table reads and I do the recordings, and that's kind of all I have to do, work wise. And so I've found this really cool office here at a Hollywood lot, and I come here and I'm writing stuff. And I did the podcast. I did the Mike Henry show, which is on
Right.
YouTube, and I think it's on the normal podcast places as well. But I did that. I just did like 17 episodes. I think I did 17 weeks in a row, and I just wanted to do the exercise. And so I actually did it in this office where I'm sitting now, and I would have, I had Seth MacFarlane, I had my friend Rob Hubel, I had Seth Green, I've had, I had a number of people in here just talking about just literally riffing, no agenda, nothing. And during the little breaks that I would take, I would show those old commercial parodies that I made. And so I think that's the Mike Henry show. I think it's on YouTube under
Yeah.
that name or
So
my name. I don't know.
yeah, so it's MikeHenry.co, and you have an about page which has the Mike Henry Show, which you could click on and see all these great interviews with the great poster of Cleveland, the Cleveland Show, a la Mad Men, right
Yeah,
behind you.
yeah,
And then I think all your clips from the past 25 years are on Cross-Eyed TV,
yep.
which links to crosseyeDTV.com. I mean, you're juggling a whole bunch of things. So money wise, Family Guy helps you do all these other things, is what I'm assuming.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a primetime comedy that's been on for 25 years. So,
Good gravy. Wow.
it's allowed a lot.
Yeah. And then from a business side, since you had kind of a business mind, were you able to work on residuals and things of that nature in
Oh, I
terms
don't
of,
have to. Yeah. As part of being in Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild, it's automatic. Once if you're working for a production company, they're what's called a signatory, where they have to abide by those union rules to use union talent. So, the way the money works in TV is you are paid per episode, for what you do. So Family Guy used to be 22 episodes a year. Now it's 17. The business has changed a lot. But you're paid a certain amount per episode. So that's kind of what you budget yourself for the year, minus agents, lawyers, taxes, and, all that. And then residuals come automatically. So I think I've been in, I think every episode of Family Guy for, coming up on 500 episodes. So you continue to get paid, for that work. It's diminishing. So the episodes that you just did pay you the most, when they rerun or in part of a syndication package. And the episodes that you did a long time ago, it just sort of dwindles down. But
yeah.
fortunately, there's so many episodes that it helps.
Well, mentioning that you went from 22 episodes down to 17,
Yeah.
talk about how that's changing, how the landscape has kind of changed over the years. Standard sitcom TV, off during the summer. Wintertime it comes, runs the episodes again, reruns in the summer. That seems to be changing all with streaming. So you've been able to see it from the inside. What's the change been like in terms of, or did the changes in terms of how shows are made and distributed affect you at all?
Well, certainly. I mean, the number of shows affects your bottom line. If your
Yeah,
episode rate is a certain amount, and you do the math. But yeah. So it used to be, they would.
sorry, it's my dog.
Hey.
It's my
Um,
dog.
Back in the day, it was a 22 episode season. You'd get your 13 guaranteed, and then if it was doing well, ratings wise, you would get a back nine. So you'd have, 22 episodes for the year. And then the old syndication formula was, if you did 5 years, then you would get a syndication package. So it could run on, TBS or local Fox affiliates or, like whoever's gonna show it. Uh, you had to get to 100 episodes. Fortunately, Cleveland, we got to 88 episodes and still got a syndication deal.
Hmm.
So I think, I think that was maybe literally the last of those types of deals. So back in the day, we would wait for the ratings in the morning, and we'd see like Family Guy got an 8 share, which means 8% of people, males, whatever, 18 to 34, I think is the key demographic, or used to be.
Yeah.
Um, you would really fight for that share. Now, I think it's like 1 or 2% that we get.
Hmm.
Like everything is so watered down. Um, so, generally my feeling is, are you worried about your dog?
Yeah. Sorry. It's driving me. It's
That's all
driving
right.
me nuts.
There's a lot of jokes I'm not making, but
Thank you. Thank you.
but yeah, I mean, there's so much programming content out there, and you talked earlier about how easy it is to make and distribute your own stuff now. There's less gatekeepers, but there's more noise, and so it's really hard to get through all the clutter. And a show like Family Guy is obviously going to break through because it's so well established. But I don't know how anything breaks through anymore. As I sort of angle on some new stuff that I want to do that's scripted, I think I would lean toward, the purist in me wants to just make a great film that'll be a Criterion film and, be precious and be great. I don't know what kind of money there is in that unless some crazy, whatever, everything lines up for you. I think now it's making, these series of, 8 to 10 episodes seems to be, what everybody's doing, and that's where some money is. I actually don't know that much about the business formula there because I'm trying not to let that too much dictate. I don't want to learn too much about it. I want to just kind of get a rough idea of where I'm headed and focus on the work and then see how it shakes out.
Yeah. It seems, with the way things are changing all the time, I mean, they talk about Hollywood, the Hollywood machine, people being caught up, and it just seems frustrating or maybe just mind-boggling to try to keep up on what's going on. Oh, now we're streaming. Oh, now we're posting here on YouTube. Oh, next year it's going to be some other thing. It's got to be really, like I said, frustrating to try to figure out what to do.
I think the best way to go about this or anything is just to get your research. If you want to read up on the industry a little bit or pick up some news on, on your social media about from the Hollywood Reporter or whoever on the way things are headed, maybe have, phone calls with your, agent or your wannabe agent or your other friends who are doing stuff, and then write what you want to write and spend a lot of time in silence and just meditate and just stay in touch with the flow of what your life is. This is where I've really gone in my life is, I've gone from sarcastic poop jokes to, jokes about farting while you're meditating. So I've really evolved.
It's an evolution.
No, but it's true. I mean, everybody's on their own trip in life and their own journey. And, like I said, you just push for what makes you feel good and what seems like it could really be, and then sort of evaluate the practical logistics of that and go for it. And,
Yeah.
If your passion is skipping rocks across a lake, I don't know how much money you're going to make doing that. So maybe that's just something that you do to ponder how you're going to make some money. I don't know, but
Well,
you
mentioned the evolution of your humor evolving or de-evolving, whichever. The state of comedy right now seems to be, I don't know, challenging in a way. Are people being, what you see, more cautious, or I don't know. Are there any punk rockers of comedy out there?
I don't think Family Guy Family Guy has changed. There's just
Well, how do you think Family Guy has changed then? They're still, I mean, they still have gags a minute, but how have they changed over the years from what you've seen?
It used to be, it was a free for all. The writer's room was a free for all. We would say anything. If you left the room, you would get destroyed. And you'd come back in and, it was, I think now there, I think the business in general is much more cautious, and there are people in there who are, you're just more concerned with losing your job than you would have been.
Hmm, interesting. Anybody else you see out there that's kind of making some noise in a way?
Um, I'm trying to think of what makes me laugh now, and I
Yeah,
honestly just go back to classic stuff. Uh, I don't know. I see a lot of people trying, and I respect that. I think personally, I've like I was joking about before, I've just sort of evolved. I'm less inclined to watch something that is trying to be funny than I am something that is trying to be sincere that has comedy as a byproduct. I love Alexander Payne's movies. I think his movies are great. They make you laugh, they make you cry, and it's just real. And I don't, I'm not a huge fan of things that are too contrived.
well,
So,
that goes back to advertising in a way.
God, advertising is just brutal. Yeah, I won't go into it here, but I actually
Yeah,
recorded a couple commercials off the air the other day while I was watching some sports, and it is just the it is so bald, which is something I can say to you and to me.
yeah,
There's just no veil of who they're trying to appeal to, and it's just not healthy. Any food you see advertised is not healthy
yeah.
food. Like I think it's just a national, you know, just all the beer and all the,
The
it's just
gambling. Don't get me started on the gambling
yeah,
spot.
yeah. My son is
Insane.
actually writing an honors thesis about sports betting in this country, and I'm so proud of him for like gravitating to that. And yeah, everybody wants a shortcut. Everybody just wants to feel good. I say everybody is a broad term, but
Right.
it's really encouraged to just you know, take take the easy way and try to win the lottery, so to speak. And, you know, there's
Yeah.
nothing funny about that unless somebody, has a bodily function in the middle of it all.
Exactly. Well, in the little bit of time I have left with you, let's talk about AI. So I know,
Yeah.
a few years ago there was a writer strike, and one of the um, conditions, or one of the things people were concerned about, was AI. Being a voice actor, it's got to make you a little nervous in terms of what's going on with AI, because if they could do it with video, obviously AI voices is
Yeah.
is right up there. What are your thoughts on what's going on with AI and the industry?
Yeah. Well, I knew nothing of AI a few months ago. And so I took what they called a boot camp
Hmm.
online with a woman that I know is an AI expert. And so she taught this thing for an hour and a half, every Wednesday for 4 weeks. And I learned a ton. And I learned that I don't need to you know, turn myself into a Martian, flying to the moon and, all the cool visual stuff you can almost do. Um, but I did learn to use Chat GPT as the greatest research tool ever.
Hmm.
If you just give it a specific prompt, it will tell you, I wrote in a bunch of stuff. If I were going to do a stand up routine, my point of view is this, and this. My experiences are these things. Help me construct a 20-minute stand up comedy set. And the thing in 5 seconds just shot out something, not jokes, but just a great structure
Hmm.
for doing that. And I was like, wow, okay. So AI is incredibly useful. And I'll be honest, if I was creating mass content, if I was a studio, I'd be all over AI. I would put it to work, in the same way that, Jurassic Park changed everything that was the first real CGI animation, you know, instead of having a massive crew out there wrangling a huge fake dinosaur, it's just five guys on a computer and, or however many people. But, that's changed. That it just changes the landscape. And,
All right.
in the same way, animation, you don't need to go shoot it. You need some artists who can draw it. So it, you know, you have to be nimble in what you're choosing to do. And as a voice actor or an actor, you got to just have some faith in who you're working with, that they're not going to replace you with AI. and you have to have some faith that the nuance of your humanity is going to shine through in what you're doing. But at the same time, you got to know that the, you know, I would think 80-90% of stuff is going to go computer generated at some point. You know, so I don't know. It's a daunting and changing landscape. You know, you don't know. But again, if you sit in silence and you just trust your gut and you get all the information you can and you are true to yourself, you're going to figure out where where you belong and make your own stuff and use your voice in that. That's what I realized back in the day when I was doing stand up and improv and all this other stuff is like, I don't want to be at the mercy of a casting process. I'm just going to make my own stuff. And so that's what I started doing. And then in Family Guy, it was kind of the same thing because I was creating stuff in the room that I would ultimately put on the screen. And so I would encourage people to make their own stuff. Tell the story you want to tell and do it in your voice and do it with your whatever visuals you're inspired to make or capable of making. And, just tell your story because that's all any of this is stories.
Yeah. And so you're not worried though about maybe retroactively someone taking the voice of Cleveland that you created or,
That's a bad example.
Yeah, I know, not bad. So not Cleveland, but, Lieutenant Dan from Orville or any of your other voices from Family Guy and then kind of manipulating it in a way that's just enough to have you go, wait, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. I know the strike, hopefully got all the actors and creators some protection, but are you worried about that at all?
No, I think humans can go ahead and replace your voice just as easy as AI can.
Yeah. Well, Mike Henry of Family Guy, the Mike Henry Show, Cross-Eyed TV. You could find his stuff at mikehenry.co and all over the place, all over the internet. I just want to thank you for coming on Full Disclosure today to talk to me about your career and about, what's going on. It's been great to get to know you a little bit more.
Thanks, Ian. I really appreciate doing it. And, I look forward to listening to it. And hopefully I sound cool, like a real cool dude.
I'm just
who really knows what's up.
I just, I did want to say, I hope that you appreciate that. I'm sure you have interviews where people say, "Oh, do the voice. Oh, do the voice." Like dance, dance, monkey dance. So I didn't want to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I'll give you a little OG Cleveland. How's that?
Thank you.
Remember Cleveland?
Yeah.
And Herbert, I'm not going to do Herbert because it takes me a minute to warm up, to hit that beautiful falsetto. And, oh, no, I gave you a taste of that. And then Consuela. Still doing Consuela.
Herbert's great. Great. Just a crazy,
great in a way that he's pedophile.
Just a crazy.
Well, he's never going to catch the Roadrunner. So as long as that never happens, we're in good shape.
Well, Mike Henry, thanks so much for coming on Full Disclosure.
All right, Ian. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Peace.